Welcome into a special open week episode of Texans on Tap. I'm Brandon Strange with Charlie Polillo and Josh Jordan. Follow them on X at Polillo and at Josh Jordan 975 and read their work on sportsmap.com. Texans finally have an off week after 13 grueling weeks in a row, hopefully to mend up and be ready for week 15 against the Dolphins. One guy who won't be returning for week 15 is Aziz al-Shaair. We're going to be talking about all those reactions and the news to that suspension. We also got an interesting endorsement from the Texans offense that seems to corroborate some insider rumblings we've been hearing over the past couple of weeks. I want to get your thoughts on that as well. Just a reminder to hit like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Click the bell for notifications so you know as soon as new content drops, like when we go live after every game this season. If you're on the go, we're on all your favorite podcast apps. Just search Texans on Tap. I want to start with the al-Shaair reaction because it's all over the place. The league came down hard with the response that accompanied the announcement of the suspension. And in short order, the appeal was denied. The pearl-clutching part of the media thinks the punishment wasn't enough. The local media thought it was a no-brainer that the suspension would be reduced. So, gents, we'll start with you. What are your reactions to the suspension itself? And if you want, give me some of your thoughts on some of the more interesting feedback we've seen from the media, former players, and even the Texans themselves.
I was mildly surprised with 3 that he should have been suspended was an absolute. The hit on its own merits and track record, right? We're not in a court of law where prior behavior can be excluded as evidence. This is the 3rd strike this season of unacceptable play by Aziz al-Shaair. The punch he threw on the sideline in Chicago, an out-of-control moment, the blatant hit out of bounds a couple weeks back against Tony Pollard of the Titans, and then, against a quarterback. It's a separate discussion if you want to argue quarterbacks are overprotected. Why don't you put skirts on them or make it flag football? You can bitch and moan about that all you want. But these are the rules. Everyone knows these are the rules. The quarterbacks, except for journeyman types or young guys on rookie contracts, these are expensive, prized commodities, the most important players in the sport. And it's well established they're going to be hyper-protected or overprotected, if you want to call it that. And if we want to get into the mechanics of the al-Shaair hit, he really had no defense. Those demonizing him personally, and then you get into any sort of racist garbage. That's just the idiot fringe, which is going to exist, I guess, on any topic of debate. But there's an old saying, if you don't want to do the time, then don't do the crime. And Aziz al-Shaair did the crime in this case.
Yeah, I thought it would be, I was thinking 1 or 2 games, but when I saw it was 3, I was really shocked in the moment, but I figured it would get appealed down, but that didn't happen. Who knows how much D'Amico and Casario's comments had to do with that? Nobody really knows but the league. I am a little surprised by the outrage of the people on ESPN acting like you've never seen stuff like this in football before. And people like Mad Dog Russo saying he should be suspended for the rest of the season and he shouldn't be able to return until Trevor Lawrence returns. And then you had the timing while the appeal was going down of it coming out that Trevor Lawrence was going to be placed on IR. So then it looked even worse. But then you come to find out it's most of that IR, from what we know, is due to that surgery, the shoulder surgery that we knew he was possibly going to have even before the Texans game. So there was a lot of stuff that played into it. It was all over the map, though. Like Jeff Saturday, the guys on First Take, I think, had a lot to do with this. The Stephen A. Smith, all these guys, they were killing the Texans, killing al-Shaair for what they did. And I thought it was a little over the top, but I think that had something to do with it, getting that narrative going in the national media, making him out to look like a terrible person. I think one thing Saturday did say, though, he has a lot of knowledge being in a lot of these committees. He said that al-Shaair has been warned like 7 different times behind the scenes. So there's some stuff going on that maybe the public wasn't aware of. But I would also point out when, Casario was like, hey, what's the deal here? You jump all the way to 3 games when he's never been ejected. He's never been suspended before. He brought up examples of Kareem Jackson. And, Stephen A. Smith made fun of it like, oh, so you're complaining that they should have suspended him sooner. What an asinine argument. But I think he's kind of missing the point. If they would have slapped him with a 1-game suspension or something like that, instead of waiting until going all the way up to 3, maybe the behavior would have changed. If he would have gotten a 1-game suspension, you didn't have to jump all the way to 3 games. Whereas we know these are 3 huge games for the Texans with the Chiefs and the Ravens and the Dolphins. And I also think it's interesting, the quarterbacks that al-Shaair would have been facing in those games, the faces of the entire NFL. Tua, who's the face of concussions in the NFL. And then you have Lamar and Patrick Mahomes, who are perennial MVP players every single season. I don't think it's lost on the NFL that maybe we don't want this guy playing against them. I think that might be part of it. I heard them kicking that around on the flagship today. I think there might be something to it. So there's something there, but I also noticed guys like Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers coming in and defending the play, saying like, well, Trevor Lawrence was really trying to get that first down, and you kind of take your life in your own hands when you wait till the last second to slide, especially against a player like that kind of plays on the edge. Aaron Rodgers even brought up, like, he was on the Pat McAfee show. He's like, he's number 0, right? And they were like, yeah. And he's like, oh, I know about him. I didn't face him when we played this year, but when we were doing film study, he jumped off the screen to me. He's a good player. That guy plays physical. I knew if I was going to face him in that game, I would have to know where number 0 was at all times throughout the game. So it's really interesting that you get 2 different perspectives on this, but it's just really disappointing for the Texans because he's a big-time playmaker. They have some big games coming up. We have to hope Christian Harris is going to be coming back. Nick Caserio said it could be a possibility. I know he's not technically the inside middle linebacker that al-Shaair is, but we know that he can play linebacker at a high level when he's healthy.
I thought the 3 games gave the wiggle room for the suspension to be reduced to 2 upon appeal, but the response to the appeal didn't take very long. So 3 games is 3 games. There's a difference between physical and, if not dirty, at least illegal. Tom Brady, here's your hypocrisy card. A stiff breeze or someone brushing his shoulder. Tom Brady was the first guy to get up. Where's the flag? Where's the flag? Roughing the quarterback? Where's the flag on that? So I disregard Brady's outlook on this. And being aware of where a good mobile defender is on the field is different than needing to be hyper-conscious to gird yourself against a cheap shot or a borderline hit. The reality is Lawrence slid when he was 4 yards away from al-Shaair. Of course, it happens very quickly. 4 yards, you're talking about a split second to the point of contact. But al-Shaair goes in low. So once Lawrence starts the slide, he has given himself up. al-Shaair went in full force with a metal-braced forearm shot. And so if the idea was, well, he slid so late, if he didn't slide, was al-Shaair diving at his knees? That's not exactly illegal, right? Look at the angle, the height at which al-Shaair is going in. He did not have a defense leg to stand on this other than to try to argue to the reduced suspension. In terms of Caserio and D'Amico, of course, they're always going to back their player to the hilt on this. And there's a difference between human character off the field and football character, or at least penalties committed on the field. Was it ludicrous? We want a lady on the streets and a freak in the sheets or something like that, right? We expect our football players to be savage beasts on the field, but not the way they could do it in the past. If we want to go back to Ray Lewis, John Lynch, Ronnie Lott, or way back to Ray Nitschke and Dick Butkus, the game cannot be played that way anymore. It should not be played that way anymore, and it certainly shouldn't be celebrated. You think back, I mean, it's not in black and white TV days where ESPN on its Monday Night Countdown or Sunday Night Sport, they had a whole segment dedicated to he got jacked up, where they'd show players just getting laid out, receivers over the middle, kill shots against quarterbacks. And in the CTE or modern era of evolution and thought, right, these are not robots. They may be the closest within the sporting realm, in team sports anyway, to what we have as modern day gladiators. They're not. They're football players. They're human beings. There's law and order. And al-Shaair crossed the line. That's
and
simple.
a spectacle. the spectacle too, right? Him not going off the field, fighting guys all the way through the end zone. And even though the Jacksonville players followed him over there and him yelling at people in the stands and Will Anderson having to hold on to him, they had to go to commercial break. That game seemed like it lasted forever. The NFL is probably like, hey, we have advertisers. You're slowing up our slate here. You're costing us money. Not alone that. And, D'Amico coming out and saying, hey, those players came off the bench and they should be held accountable too. And we noticed nobody from Jacksonville was fined that we know of at all, even though there were offsetting penalties to where the Jags didn't even get an advantage from that, but nobody got penalized from Jacksonville. But I think the big point everybody was ringing home with D'Amico's comment was, if that would have happened to CJ Stroud, you would expected your players on your bench to do the exact same thing. And that's probably, I had to think about that. I was like, yeah, if this would have happened to CJ, I would have been pissed.
And that's amplified in my Sports Map column. Fabulous segueing there, Josh. The Texans reaction, Texans fan reaction, it's about which side is your bread buttered. If everything was the exact same way and it was Josh Hines Allen who laid out CJ Stroud, people would want Josh Hines Allen kicked out of the league around here. We can tie it the same way to the Astros scandal. If the Dodgers had been found exactly guilty of exactly what the Astros had done, and the Dodgers had beaten the Astros in the 2017 World Series, Astros fans galore would have said, the Dodgers are cheaters and frauds and rip-off artists, and their World Series title should be voided. Whether fan is actually derived from fanaticism is debatable, but there's a lot of truth to it regardless.
If you're watching on YouTube, be sure to give us your thoughts on the suspension. We're always interested in reading everyone's feedback there. Josh mentioned the D'Amico and Nick Caserio comments. That was probably as animated as we've seen Nick Caserio. I just wanted to read just a quick blurb from that press conference. He said, for the league to make some of the commentary they made about lack of sportsmanship, lack of coachability, lack of paying attention to the rules, quite frankly, it's embarrassing. The picture that's been painted about Aziz, his intentions, who he is as a person, quite frankly, it's BS. He didn't say BS. It's unfair to the individual. It's unfair to the organization. Look, there's a line between defending your player and poking the league. I want to know, do you think Caserio possibly crossed that with his feedback? And then also, Charlie, to your point about kind of the tie-in, do you think now, what do you think about the Texans joining the Astros as the villains from H-Town?
Well, and throw in an ornery week from the Rockets in terms of comments about officiating and how things are adjudicated in their games. I don't think there's going to be any sort of lasting ramification, or the Texans are now on the NFL's you-know-what list. This was an isolated episode of this magnitude in open space, a quarterback, and when he goes into that fencing position, it was a horrifying element to that. And in terms of, al-Shaair being suspended from Tua, speaking of, take care of that guy, and then Mahomes and Lamar Jackson, al-Shaair would have to be an idiot if he would to take a cheap shot or cross the line in any of those games were he eligible for them. Silver lining, he should be fresh for the playoffs. Right? He'll get back for the regular season finale, a game that is to be determined whether it means anything.
Do you think we'll see him back before Christian Harris? I'm kidding.
Boy, it'd be nice to have one more linebacker on the field who can run. But let's be clear, al-Shaair's been a solid player, but this isn't a devastating blow to the defense. And he'd been a very comparable player to what Blake Cashman was here last year. When Blake Cashman missed a game or two, it wasn't, oh no, the Texans defense is devoid of hope now.
Yeah, they give up about 1 more yard per carry in the run game when al-Shaair's not on the field. And we've seen toe-to-toe on coverage. It's not pretty. al-Shaair's been pretty good at that. So they are going to miss something. There's a reason they went out and signed this guy.
One of the interesting things that came out of that presser with Nick Caserio was a question to him on whether there was any thought to pivoting the play calling duties away from OC Bobby Slowik. Following CJ's breakout rookie performance, there was all kinds of talk about Slowik possibly being in line for a head coaching job. But since then, his stock has dropped faster than the Hawk Tuah girls crypto coin. Caserio made it very clear in the presser that they are not moving away from Slowik as the play caller. that underscores what we've been hearing from the local media the past couple of weeks, where whether it was Lance Zierlein from ESPN Houston or DJ Bianame from ESPN.com, both of those guys in particular have said we should not expect a change in the OC in the offseason. Look, we still have 4 games left in the season, and anything could happen. But short of a significant uptick in offensive production, specifically in the second halves of games, are you at least a little surprised to hear that even behind the scenes, there isn't really a sense that Bobby Slowik's job is at risk?
No, I think Caserio runs a very buttoned up ship, and they're going to be as leak proof as possible. It would also be bad business even internally at this point in the season, right? All the second half woes that we have documented through the course of the season. Well, 2 of the last 3 games, granted against garbage competition, but they put points up in the second half. They are 8-5, likely to win the division. Then you see what happens in the playoffs. But even if they fade, I mean, short of an utter collapse, 4 bad offensive games, they lose all 4, miss the playoffs, where the critical mass of ineptitude almost forces change. I just don't see it getting there. It's been a disappointing season on a relative basis offensively, but they're not one of the worst offenses in the league. They have personnel issues in the offensive line. Mixon missed 3+ games. Nico Collins has missed 3 games. And on top of that, it's Slowik's second year. So if year 1, he was Wunderkind Bobby, getting head coach interviews, and year 2 is, hey, what happened to that guy? I think year 3, it's a best out of 3 series. That if this year's a step back, it's not like they've fallen into the abyss where there should be no hope or thinking that there's no chance they could be a better offense next season. And if you don't make progress in year 3 with presumed personnel upgrade in that offensive line, and ideally Mixon and Collins healthy for all the season, and CJ Stroud in his 3rd year, I think then we can have this conversation in more earnest a year from now.
Charlie hit on it right there. How often do you see teams take away play calling duties when you're first place in your division and you're 4-1 in your division and you're set to make the playoffs? You just don't see that very often, even though we know
those decisions to whom.
Yeah. Why would they do that? Bring in somebody that's never been experienced in a role like this a few weeks before you go into the playoffs, hopefully. It just doesn't make sense. But Caserio also said some other interesting things in that conversation. He said that, Juice Scruggs is a much better center than he is a guard. I think we can all agree on that. But he also said that Scruggs has done a great job since moving over, which we know that's not the case. Yeah, to be fair, according to PFF, he was really good against the Jags, but he's been terrible in most of those other games. So, every week's different, every matchup's different. But also the Jags don't have interior players like the Titans have. So, that's part of it. I think it's, in Nick's opinion, I bet he thinks it's personnel, that if they get guard corrected, maybe center, throw some bodies at that in the draft and in free agency next year. He probably thinks that it's something they can get corrected, that it's not a Bobby Slowik thing, or maybe Lance and some of these other people are right. Zierlein, that the O-line coach will end up being the fall guy here, and Bobby Slowik will be good to go. So this doesn't really surprise me, but in the big picture, I don't feel great about what I'm seeing here. And you've noticed, ever since Stephon Diggs got hurt, Tank Dell's just nowhere to be found. And when Nico is hurt, man, this offense struggles. Thank God they signed Joe Mixon, or they'd be in big trouble.
Yeah, I think, the jury is out, and next season maybe delivers the final verdict, but we're not in the man has got to go territory, barring calamity over the next month. And for all the aggravation of the second half and the fair questioning certain things about Slowik, it's not like they're a bad offense. It's not as if they can't game plan at all, right? If they've been terrible at so-called in-game adjustments, well, the game plan going in, since the first half offense has been very good, you have to give credit there if you're going to give blame on the other end of things. I think it's just fun for fans. It's cathartic at the first sign of difficulties. Off with their heads! You have to make changes. And coaches, assistant coaches are easier targets than players.
And just quickly, I think the big thing, maybe why we're easing off this a little bit, Brandon, Stroud's not getting his hit as often as he was earlier in the season. Over the last few weeks, he's not taking those shots. But if we look at the entire season, He's been sacked the second most in the entire NFL. Only Caleb Williams has been sacked more than CJ. He's been sacked 41 times. So if we were seeing this continue to where like the Jets game and some of these other games where he was picking himself up over and over again, then yeah, I think we would be looking at Slowik a little harder. But maybe they've got a few of these things figured out, putting Patterson at center and getting Kenyon Green out of there is a big part of it.
I think it's interesting when the offense was, they had their breakout season last year. There were some that dismissed Slowik's contribution, saying, well, it's easy to look that good when you've got a guy like CJ Stroud. But then when CJ Stroud regresses, they go, oh, it's because of Bobby Slowik. So it's what OC can be one of those thankless jobs. I'll tell you one guy who won't be in consideration for that role is Eric Bieniemy, who was released from his OC job with UCLA this week. You want to talk about stock dropping. Remember when all the local outrage when the Texans weren't seriously or considering him for a OC position, but his drop off has been amazing. I want to stick to the offense because we always talk on this show. We try to not be overreactive. We try to have perspective. Josh, you did a deep dive into some of the offensive stats to help provide us from perspective. Tell us what you found in your digging that you thought was interesting. And Charlie, I'd love to get your reaction.
Yeah, I was like, hey, we're through 13 games. That's a pretty good sample size there. So what does the offense look like? For CJ, if we start with the positives, they're 4th in passing yards this season. So, you're top 5 in passing yards. That's not so bad with a second-year quarterback. Now, to be fair, the Texans have played one more game than everybody else. But after I did a little bit of math, even if we took the bye weeks out and everybody had played the same amount of games, CJ's still right around 10th in passing yards. So not bad. It could be a lot worse. In TDs, I think they're 15th. So the passing TDs have come down a little bit. But we also have to remember that a lot of that is because of Joe Mixon. He's 3rd in rushing TDs in the NFL with 11. You got to remember last year, Singletary had 4 and Pierce had 2. So a lot of this is they're getting in the end zone with Mixon more than they are with CJ Stroud. That's part of it. We've seen an uptick in the interceptions a bit for CJ, but I think he has 9. It's not an overwhelming number. He's 21st in QBR. I thought that was interesting. That's kind of that ESPN stat where they kind of account for a lot of different things. So that maybe concerns me a little bit. The completion percentage isn't great. It's 26th, but his wasn't that great last year. And that's what we kind of liked about CJ. His completion percentage is kind of lower because he pushes the ball down the field a lot. You're less likely to catch passes that way. And he was also throwing the ball away a lot quicker last year when, a pressure would come just to make sure he didn't take that sack. I kind of wish he'd do that a little more this year. I think I'd like to see that more from his game. But overall, as far as CJ, and I can get to, running backs and receivers later, but just to answer your question, it's okay. It's okay. It's not bad. And the Texans are going to point at the positives. Hey, we're top 5 in receiving yards. Everything's fine. Nothing to see here. 21st in QBR, but the most concerning, 41 sacks, which I mentioned earlier, 2nd in the league. Hopefully this trend will continue and they'll keep CJ upright more often than not.
One number I'll add that I think is a somewhat telltale in that Stroud hasn't been as good. The offense hasn't been as good. He's down a full yard per attempt. He averaged 8.2 yards per passing attempt last season. This year, he's at 7.2. The loss of Nico Collins for a stretch, the fall off in production of Tank Dell, though last season Tank Dell wound up missing the final chunk of the season. So it just hasn't been as good. But there are some people you'd think that Daniel Jones is the quarterback of the Texans, or that first season and a half Bryce Young has been quarterbacking the Texans, and that's just silly. It turns out they're not on a rocket ship to the Super Bowl. Though if you get it in the tournament, stuff happens. Cincinnati Bengals a few years ago, Arizona Cardinals back in the Kurt Warner day as a 9-7 team, Eli Manning with a 9-7 team, 17 games now. But this offense is pretty good. Plus side of the middle, not nearly as good as Philadelphia, Cincinnati when rolling, and a handful of other teams. That's not tragic. It's not where they want to wind up or where they should be by this time, say, next season. But it's not some crap show offense.
Yeah, and if you look at the balance, they are third in rush yards per game at about 88 yards per game. Mixon's only behind Saquon Barkley and Derrick Henry. Awesome. And then CJ, top 5, if we want to account for the bye week, top 10. So your rushing game is top 3 in the NFL. Your passing game is top 10-ish. For balance purposes, that's a pretty good offense. And Nico Collins, he's first in receiving yards per game at 104. He's been amazing. He's only played 8 games this year, and he's still 10th in overall receiving yards in the entire NFL, even though he missed 5 games. So there's a lot there. And without Diggs, we have to mention that. Not having Stephon Diggs has actually been a big deal.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned Joe Mixon. I think we can all agree. I mean, that's the one part of the offense that has been undeniably better year over year. Can you imagine what Joe Mixon would be able to produce during this Renaissance season of his had he actually had some good run blocking?
Yes.
And remember, the Texans rightfully preferred Saquon Barkley, but decided the bidding was a little too rich for his blood. And Barkley's better than Mixon because he has that explosive home run element and the whole backwards hurdle thing. But he's also running behind an elite offensive line in Philadelphia. So, there are yards after contact, and then there's how many yards do you get before you're even touched. And Joe Mixon has just been stellar in turning nothing into a little something and something into more than something this season.
And let's give Nick and D'Amico some credit here. We criticize them when we feel like it's necessary. Let's, praise them. Giving Joe Mixon that contract extension before the season looks like a really smart move, because think what we'd be talking about right now. Like, are we going to be able to get Joe Mixon back? He's going to free agency, and we'd be all worried about that. But no, Nick got him under contract. He's going to be here for the next couple of years, and he's been terrific. So really savvy move there by the GM and by D'Amico.
It is interesting thinking back of the commentary that was surrounding that signing when they let Singletary walk, and basically people were saying, "Oh, well, you just got a different version of Singletary, and they're kind of the same person." They have not been the same person. Joe Mixon has been an absolute difference maker for this Texans team. I shudder to think. Terrible. Yeah, and I shudder to think what this team would look like if they did not have Joe Mixon on this team. So thank you, and you're absolutely right. Tip of the cap to Nick Caserio for that move, because that has been a stellar move. Guys, I think we'll end it there. We'll wrap. That's going to be it for this episode of Texans on Tap. We're going to be back next Thursday to preview Dolphins Texans. So make sure you subscribe to this channel with your notifications on. And if you're an Astros fan, we're going to have a new episode of our podcast, Stone Cold Stros, dropping on Monday to discuss all the latest free agency news there. So that'll be on our other channel, our other YouTube channel, Sports Map Houston. So make sure you're subscribed to that channel as well. And until then, go Texans.